Let's be friends.
Have you not?
Here we go.
And greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing and a brand new episode of the Ultra Retro Podcast. And with me today, I've got my two good friends. You know them, you love them, Miss Alicia Victoria Parker and her better half, Mr. Jack Beers. And today, with the upcoming, with the Halloween coming up, I can edit this later. I can edit that too. With Halloween coming up, we're going to do something a little special for y'all. We're going to be discussing a classic from the black and white era, a personal favorite of everyone here, The Invisible Man, starring Claude Rains. And with the usual housekeeping, y'all know what to do. Smash the like button, share this all out. And if you haven't subscribed and you enjoy the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit all notifications. So, all that being said, The Invisible Man. This, for myself, is it's in my top 5 black and white ultra retro classics. I love this movie, based on one of the really truly great science fiction novels of the late 1800s and going into the early 1900s by the great sci-fi author H.G. Wells, adapted by Universal Studios, directed by James Whale. Just a magnificent adaptation, I think, of The Invisible Man. So, Alicia, Jack, your thoughts on this? Everything starting off.
I really enjoyed it. It was one of those that it was one of those where it was really early on. They figure out how to do this special effect. I think that was the one thing that really popped in my mind when I think of that movie is when they remove the bandages early on and there's no head.
Or hands.
Yeah, and then he takes off. Yeah, he ends up taking everything off. But just I love that effect. I also feel like what's his name, Jack Griffin, the Invisible
Played by
Man.
Claude Rains. Yeah, Jack
Claude
Griffin,
Rains.
played by Claude Rains. Yeah.
There he is, right there. By the way, he did
Yep.
an excellent job at
Wonderful job.
going mad.
Yes, he did. He played unhinged very well. Of course, we've discussed a film that's Claude Rains is very well known for, of course, that being Casablanca. Also, The Adventures of Robin Hood, where he played Prince John. This was a man this was his big breakout hit in film. And it was by sheer accident, because James Whale, the director, who had done numerous great black and white classics. Of course, one of the ones he's best known for is, of course, Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff, got him his big break. Did The Old Dark House. So many films throughout his career that he did, and this was one that he's not as well known for as he should be, because honestly, some of what he was working on in Frankenstein in this movie, he perfected in a lot of ways. And, Jack, you mentioned how they made Rains appear invisible. But the thing that Whale was looking for was an actor with a very distinctive voice. And, of course, Claude Rains, being of British background, grew up as his daughter described it, on the wrong side of the River Thames in London. Very poor family. He was one of 12 children, and so on. When his daughter was growing up, he used to sing her all the Cockney songs, and he had that very distinct Cockney accent that a lot of other actors nowadays try to imitate, but he obviously was born with. And a lot of his performance, primarily the entirety of his performance, is carried through just his voice. And obviously, I was introduced to Claude Rains through Casablanca, but this was another film that I became aware of that he was in, obviously, as a lot of people do. And obviously, he also did a colorized version of the Phantom of the Opera where he played the titular Phantom, but it was a different take on the Phantom. It was a more sympathetic take than what some other versions have done in the past. So, Alicia, let me ask you: was this your first time watching Invisible Man, or have you seen it before now?
So I had not seen it before, but I see he's an underappreciated monster. Basically, I mean, he's more sinister. He's much more darker. This one is more serious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Claude Rains definitely has a range in this. I mean, we've also seen him in the Maltese Falcon, and to see him so sinister in this,
I think
where
you
he
meant
starts.
Casablanca because
Well, he did
he
both.
wasn't in Maltese Falcon.
Oh, was he? I'm sorry, but
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
so when he takes off the bandages, like Jack mentioned, that's when he starts his killing spree, and it's crazy. And I think the housekeeper, we had seen her in
Una
Frankenstein.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, and she played Maid Marian's handmaiden in Adventures of Robin Hood.
yes.
Yes.
So several
So it's
connections here back to other to other classics.
yes.
So, but go on, Alicia, please.
So when he takes off the bandages, that's when he goes into killing spree. When he keeps them on, he's a bit more subdued, more somber. Like, oh, you can control me, but if I take them off, oh, you can't catch me. I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the interesting thing with this particular take on the Invisible Man, H.G. Wells had final script approval for the script for this movie. Now he made a few concessions, but they had gone through several different screenplays before they got to this version that we got in this movie. And Wells had final script approval because he wanted to make sure the integrity of his story was kept. And obviously it was. Now, granted, he allowed a few things. They allowed to have a love interest for Jack Griffin, Claude Rains' character, and that was she was played by Gloria Stewart, who's known who had a long and illustrious career that kind of was capstoned when she played Old Rose in Titanic. Obviously, she has her performance in this is very interesting. It's a little more melodramatic than if you say the love interest in Frankenstein with Henry Frankenstein's fiancee Elizabeth. Flora is a lot more high strung, and at times I found her a bit annoying, but at the same time I get what they were going for with her character. Jack, Alicia, what did you all what was y'all's take on Flora?
Like she was a tragic character because she was the love interest, and of course,
Mhm.
you know, it was one of those situations where it's like, oh, you know, stop all this and come away with me, and of course, he didn't want to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, she wants to save him, and she hates to see that he's suffering, and she wants him to be cured. But then when she was with the cure involved, like, wait a minute, is this really worth it in the end? Maybe he's beyond saving at this point.
Well, and you obviously you have the other chemist that's working with Flora's father, the head chemist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but Kemp, Dr. Kemp, and everything was the other assistant. And this guy was kind of Weasley because he was always trying to get Flora away from Jack and have her be his gal instead of the other way around. Whereas if you compare this with the situation in Frankenstein, Elizabeth and the other suitor, I can't remember his name either, and I feel bad about this but the dynamic there was they understood that he had feelings for her, and she did to a degree, but she really was in love with Henry Frankenstein. But in this, Laura, she doesn't even consider Kemp because I think she knows deep down that this guy's kind of Weasley, that he's kind of underhanded, and she was more concerned with Jack, whereas all he's worried about is trying to discredit Jack and ruin him to a degree. Or do you think I'm reading that differently?
Yeah, a lot of times he's undermining him, and it's like, why are you there? We need to get rid
Right.
of you.
So, the other aspect of this is, of course, Jack's change in stance and how he sees his affliction, where he's trying to figure out how to come back from being invisible to where he starts going extremely mad. And he sees himself as this almost godlike figure that can murder and rob and pillage and loot and do anything and everything that he wants and learn all the secrets of the world and essentially rule the world. So, considering the shift in his personality and his character, obviously we know that the one chemical that he uses. I don't know if this is a real world chemical or not. Something called monocaine. What did you think of his descent into madness? What was y'all's take on that?
Uh, it was good because so there's not a lot of there's a lot of monsters out there where there's a sympathetic side to them where it's like, oh, Frankenstein's monster wasn't all that bad. He was mainly just ignorant of the world, and how and all that. Whereas Claude Rains' Invisible Man, Jack Griffin, he knew what he was doing was evil, and he didn't care. He lost all his humanity. He was trying to get what's his name to join him
Yeah,
in his
Kemp.
pillaging and in his killing, his murder spree he wanted to do. Um, he wanted to, he wanted to rule the world.
Mhm. Pretty
Yeah.
much. So, Alicia, anything you
So it
want to
seemed like
elaborate on?
he lost his moral compass. Unfortunately, I mean the invisibility made it more visible that his moral compass was all gone. When he was visible, his moral compass was invisible, so to speak. But in this case, it's very clear. I don't care. I want to kill. I'm going to do whoever's in the way. He almost forgets about his love interest and says, like, I don't care about her. I don't care about anything. And if you don't follow what I'm going to do, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to rob you. I'll do whatever else is necessary. And I'm like, really? Yikes.
Yeah, because here's the thing. This guy was just as he described himself, he was just a poor chemist working for a much more well known scientist, Flora's father. And when he is talking to her and everything, when she finally finds him at Kemp's house and she's trying to reach him, he's like, at first, he's wanting to figure out the way to come back to being visible again, but then he realizes the power that he has.
Hmm.
And as you mentioned, he seems to lose his moral compass. But here's something that just popped in my head and everything with the points that you two brought up. We as people operate by a certain moral code in the world. Is it the fact that he became invisible that freed him to lose that moral code? Or is it the fact that he became invisible that exposed the fact that he really didn't care about living by a moral code, in a manner of speaking?
Oh, that's philosophical.
All right, I don't
So
mean to go deep and everything
no,
on
it's
you.
fine. It's fine. Because somewhere in the movie they were talking about the monocaine. They said that
Hmm.
they used it on a dog or something like that, and the dog went mad. So
Yeah.
I think that's a factor. The monocaine was a factor in it. I
Mhm.
do think the idea of when you gain a power, let's say, you don't
Mhm.
want to lose that power. You don't want to get rid of that power. Um, people who are people who are elected into power, they try to stay in power as long as they can because they like the idea of having that power, and I think that was another factor in what made this guy as evil, much more evil than Frankenstein's monster ever was.
Yeah.
Um, he understood what the consequences of his actions, that it's going to hurt people, he's going to kill people, he's going to you know uh, hurt people who are close to him.
Mhm.
uh, but at some point he just stops caring. He stops caring, and he just wants to rule the world.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about Reigns' performance is it isn't just the his speaking parts, but that laugh, that now very iconic laugh. That's one half comedic and humorous, but at the same time very at times deranged and semi psychotic in a manner of speaking. He is reveling in the fact that if he's not dressed, he can walk around just about anywhere. He can walk into any place practically in the world, learn the world's secrets, learn the secrets of the royal family.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
can travel anywhere because as long as he's in the nude and he has some way of keeping himself warm or keeping himself cool, he could travel overseas and and create a reign of terror in just about any part of the world,
Hmm.
literally. And he revels in this, and it's kind of an interesting parallel between Jack Griffin and Henry Frankenstein. Now, granted, there were some creative liberties taken from the Mary Shelley book and the movie that James Whale did with Boris Karloff and Dwight Frye and all of them. But the premise is still similar. Man tinkers with nature and tries to do things that would be considered extremely taboo, and there's a consequence for it. Now, in the book version of Frankenstein, the monster eventually gains intelligence and sentience and comes after Henry and says, "Hey, I want you to make another one, a companion for me." And Henry eventually refuses. And then the monster says, "Okay, fine. I'm going to take away everything you have. I'm going to drive you mad." And that's what eventually happens to Henry in the book. He ends up dying.
Hmm.
If you've read the book and everything, or watched
Yes.
any type of synopsis on it, obviously that's changed in both Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Now, granted, Bride of Frankenstein is somewhat similar to the book that Mary Shelley originally wrote, but they put some different they changed the dynamic a little bit where Henry still survives, if I remember
Hmm.
correctly, in Bride of Frankenstein, but the monster and the bride and the other doctor uh, end up dying.
Right.
But in Invisible Man, Jack does die.
Hmm. Yeah,
So, and
he's
we
shot.
eventually do see, yeah,
Yes,
he's
at the
shot
very
by
end.
the police. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the interesting thing is with this movie, it's only a little over an hour long, and yet it tells such a compelling story. It really grabs you. And I know there have been other adaptations of The Invisible Man, the one that they did back in the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s with Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth Shue called
Hollow Man.
Hollow Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Granted, that one's a little bit longer. It does build the suspense a little bit better. Let me ask you two, of Invisible Man and Hollow Man, which one do you like better? Or which one do you think is more accurate to the book?
That's a good. That's a good. So I know they modernized Hollow Man,
Mhm.
um, but I like both. And I'm not sure which
Mhm.
ones I like better. I really like Kevin Bacon.
Everybody likes Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, I really like Kevin Bacon, but I really appreciate Claude Rains' performance.
Mhm.
Um, just I love the by Hollow Man, it was easy to do those special effects,
Yeah,
but
obviously.
when you were doing it back in the 1930s, 1940s,
Mhm.
that was a much bigger challenge back then. I would say
And yet
the
they
fact
pulled
that
it
they were
off.
able to,
Mhm.
yeah, they pulled it off excellently.
Yeah, definitely. Alicia, what about you? Have you seen Hollow Man?
So I've only seen bits and pieces of it, but I would say this Invisible
Fair
Man
enough.
is a much more accurate to the book because I've seen bits and pieces of the book, and I go like, this one definitely sounds a lot like the book because it feels like
Yeah.
it talks about his journey through
Mhm.
invisibility. I mean, I will say that the journey with the being fed off the evil, it fuels him when he sees these people's fear. He sees these people's panic, and it fuels him to go, "Oh, let me do more. Let me do more. Let me go this way. Let me do that way." And I think it fuels him where he's like, "I'm invincible at this point," until he gets shot, and it stuns him.
Mhm.
Like, wait a minute, somebody's gonna stop me.
Right. Oh, one thing about Hollow Man, I will say,
Mhm.
they the effect they did revolutionize it, the effect a little bit because
Mhm.
they were able to what the way they made him invisible was
It
his
went
skin
through.
kind of disappears and you see his muscles start to disappear, you see his organs and his skeleton, and then that all
Mhm.
disappears. I thought that was really
Yeah,
well done. They said that
I do
that was
remember
the
that.
first
Yeah.
time, something like that was the first time they were able to actually take the entire human body,
Mm-hmm.
and do an effect like that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing they did that was revolutionary, I'd say. The other thing that they did was, I don't think they did it in Invisible Man. The scene where he rapes the woman,
Mhm.
the woman he was spying on, and then
Mhm.
he, they,
Goes
you know,
after. Yeah.
that's one of the things that Claude Rains' character was talking about in Invisible Man, about what he could do,
Mhm.
and but you don't see that in that
No.
movie, but you do see it in Hollow Man.
Yeah, and I think for the time, even as boundary pushing as James Whale was, he wasn't willing to go that far, and I appreciate that
Right.
fact that
Right.
he had that restraint.
Yeah. Agreed.
Do does do I think that particular scene in Hollow Man makes the movie potentially better, makes the character maybe better? Not so much, but it is accurate to, as I understand the book and everything. There is a scene where that does happen, if I remember, if I remember correctly. Um, but I think that the fact that it's more implied that Jack could have done something like that rather than actually seeing it,
Hmm.
I think makes him just as dangerous because if you look at his first rampage through the village of Iping after they tried to kick him out of the the,
The
the
end.
bo- yeah, the inn, it it has a bit of a comedic touch to it when he's riding the bicycle and then he's like, "Here, you can have your bicycle back and do what you want with it." And he takes a broom and whacks some people with it. He pulls that old man's hat off his head and tosses it into a pond. He's being more mischievous there. He's not being
Right.
as bloodthirsty per se. Now, obviously, he knocks the innkeeper, the husband, down the staircase and gives him a good bonk, gives him a good good bonk on his head. And the wife is played by Una O'Connor, as we mentioned earlier. She's screaming bloody murder,
Right.
and when she's trying to bring in his lunch, and he's like, "Go away, leave me alone. I don't want to eat right now." And she's like, "Well, lunch is at 1 a.m. It's 1 now." And all he does is slam the door in her face and tells her to go away. And he yells, and she's screaming, "Blame murder again." And she's like, "He cussed me out." I'm like, "Lady, no, he didn't cuss you out. Now, granted, yes, it is your inn, and you're entitled to have say on what goes on inside your inn. But all he said was go away. He didn't cuss you out. Because last time I checked, telling a person to shut up and go away wasn't cussing him out. I I imagine we've all said far worse than that, and that's cussing a person out.
True. She's
So
over exaggerating. I think she was the
yeah, and
sympathy at
she
that point.
well, not to mention she just goes absolutely hysterical. Not to mention when he comes back to the inn to get his his books to give them to Kemp, and she jumps up on the table and is pulling up her skirt because she's so scared.
Mhm.
Yes,
So
Yeah.
she saw a mouse or something. When she does
that
that.
that's back in those days. That's what typically a woman would do if there was a mouse in the house. They jump on a table and
Eek!
check her skirt. Go, what she did
Ow.
exactly. So um, let me ask you too. Obviously, this is somewhat of a dark movie, but there is some layered in humor, which I kind of discussed. Do you all think that was appropriate for the tone of this movie?
I thought it was fun, especially when when he was doing the mischievous stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, it made sense where he was, he'd be like, oh, like he's exploring what he can do.
Mhm.
Um, and as I said, like he's starting to go a little mad too. So,
Yeah.
um, the idea of taking the guy's hat off and everything. Um, yeah, I think it was appropriate. But like you can tell the difference between when it starts to get real serious.
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what about you, Alicia? Your thoughts on that?
I say he's testing the waters at that point to figure out what can he do, what can he not do, and he's like, okay, how far can I push this without somebody saying, hey, stop?
Mhm.
Pretty much.
the the other aspect of this movie that I really appreciated, and that was watching Jack Whale or James Whale, excuse me. May he rest in peace. Sorry about that, James. James Whale's evolution as a director, because obviously he came up through the London theater circuit as a as an actor, as a director, and so on. And after he got his big break with Frankenstein, he pretty much had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted in terms of the movies that he wanted to do and how he wanted to make them and so on for Universal because he was making them money. And by early depression standards, he was making them money, which is impressive to say the least. Comparing this to say Frankenstein, which do you think is his better work, or do you think they're both on par with each other?
I like Frankenstein more.
Mm,
I would
Mm,
say.
I say they're equally balanced. It's just unfortunately this one doesn't get a lot of appreciation and a lot of love. I mean, whenever you see Halloween, they hardly ever mention Invisible Man. They always mention Frankenstein, the others, but this one is a hidden gem in many ways.
very true. Um, I've always been a fan of the classic directors, like James Whale, like Cecil B. DeMille, and so on. But to see a guy who carved out a niche and successfully did so, there's one movie involving him that I have never seen, but watching watching several of his movies now, this was done, I think, like in the mid to late '90s, called Gods and Monsters, and they actually
Oh,
had
yep.
Ian McKellen play James Whale, and they had Brendan
Yes,
Fraser in this as well.
we recently
I have
watched
never
that.
seen.
We saw that one.
It's intrigued me now to watch it myself because, I mean, being a fan of Ian McKellen and Brendan Fraser equally, it's
I
something
definitely
different from.
recommend it.
It gives an
Yeah,
interesting
because.
aspect of James Whale's story that you may not know about, basically.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
and there's a scene where they do one flashback scene, I believe, where it's
Mhm.
the Bride of Frankenstein, the
Yes.
behind the scenes of that, the Bride of
Mhm.
Frankenstein.
Mhm.
And there's one thing that's fictionalized in that one where basically they have the bride and Frankenstein meet him again, but basically that's totally fictionalized. But other than that, there's like mostly is a really good movie. There's one scene that's a little bit problematic toward the end, which I don't want to spoil, but it's like,
Yeah, no, I think I know which scene you're referring to. Maybe I'm not sure, but
we can mention it
anyway,
after the stream.
yeah, and that's fine.
Hmm.
But James Whale deserves. all the accolades and kudos that he has gotten posthumously, and even when he got in his time. And I think this movie really shows him developing as a director and an effective storyteller because eventually, because of the success of Invisible Man, then eventually he did Bride of Frankenstein, but he also did um, the sequel to All's Quiet on the Western Front, which was a big film for Universal back in the day, and that was The Road Home, which was a sequel, was a novel to, was a sequel to All's Quiet.
Right.
And he got all sorts of prestige for it, but also at the time, everything it was getting expensive as well, and Universal was under different leadership then because Carl Limley Jr. eventually stepped down, and the Limleys lost.
They got pushed out.
They got pushed out,
Yeah.
and he had to work with the higher ups, and then he eventually left the film business and everything, and lived quietly, lived comfortably, and then sadly he had a stroke, and because of that he took his own life, which was unfortunate. But being a person who enjoyed his independence, being able to do for himself, as I imagine most people would, I am saddened that he felt he had no other recourse, but at the same time, I can understand his reasoning for it, even though I feel bad that he felt he had no other way to go on living. But we have this incredible body of work, including this film itself, The Invisible Man, to look back on. And obviously, Claude Rains is no longer with us, but every Halloween or whenever we're feeling nostalgic, we have this film, and we have Casablanca and Adventures of Robin Hood and so many others that he did throughout his career. And some people may say that the Universal movies, the monster movies of the 30s and 40s, are kind of cheesy and campy by today's standards. But I think this one is a standout because it does offer a commentary on man meddling with nature and science, and also the dangers of losing your moral compass. So, um, anything you guys want to elaborate on from that in particular? Anything?
So one of the so like I recently wrote a thing about like kind of like where monsters like reimagining where they come from, but they for Claude Rains because I like him. I would say like Frankenstein's monster. They were created from science in a
Yes.
lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
They were, in his case, he was a normal person who, took a serum, became invisible, and the combination of having that power to become invisible and the monocaine that made helped drive him mad, he became purely evil. Uh, his moral compass, you know, withered away, and it got to the point where I mean the it was the people who brought him down.
Mm-hmm.
They tracked him down. They burned down the shed or building he was in.
The
He
barn, yeah.
the barn. He comes out invisible, but you could see his footprints. So they shoot at the footprints and they get him. And then when he dies, the invisibility goes away, so you can finally see his face at the very end of the film, which I thought was poetic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would agree because he was sane again to Maris speaking because he has a brief conversation with Flora. She comes to the hospital and she talks to the doctor, and he says the prognosis isn't good for him, and he actually apologizes to Flora for all the harm that he's caused her. And he seems to gain maybe just a small portion of redemption from that. I mean, he at least apologized to the one person he cared for the most and everything, the harm he had done her. Granted,
Hmm.
he never physically harmed her, but the actions that he had done wounded her
Hmm.
on a subconscious on a psychological level because she knew he was a good man and she didn't want to see him go down this road. So
Yeah, that's true.
He kind of reminded me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde a little bit because he goes from being like this sweet, loving guy, then he goes more and more evil, but then at the very end, he goes from no longer being evil, but now he's trying to be back to the regular self at that point because everybody's like, oh, this is what he looks like. And in the case with
mhm,
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they realize, wait, this is one and the same in this case.
mhm. Yeah, and and that's Robert Louis Stevenson actually did when I was in seminary, the college I was at had a drama club, and we actually did a production of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we had two actors, one who played Henry Jekyll and one who played Edward Hyde. And those two guys did such a good job, like, playing off of each other, playing the two different aspects. But Robert Louis Stevenson really, in a lot of ways, opened up the door. Well, Mary Shelley really opened the door with Frankenstein, or what was its other title, The Modern Prometheus. She opened the doorway for these science fiction stories to be told. And then, Robert Louis Stevenson came after her. H.G. Wells did his thing. And obviously, from all those books, we have all these different adaptations of these different characters. Frankenstein's monster, or Henry Frankenstein himself, Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man, Dr. Henry Jekyll, Edward Hyde, his alternate persona. And it's interesting in all three of these, the men who tinkered with science, two of them met a bad end. Whereas, if I remember correctly, Henry Jekyll was able to reclaim his life and live one. If I remember correctly, he was able to live out his life. It's been a while since we did that play. It's been a while
Mm,
since I
I
can't
don't think
remember
he does.
honestly.
I don't think he does either at the end, if I remember
Okay,
correctly.
okay, I'd have to check it out. But it's a lesson that I think we that needs to be remembered by humanity, by us. There are things in science that we can explore and experiment with, but when we start to tinker with those more primordial parts of nature and even ourselves, things tend to go wrong.
Jurassic Park.
Yes, that I was about to. I was going to say it if somebody else didn't. Yeah, Jurassic Park, most definitely. Another one of those lessons where we should not tinker with science for the wrong reasons. I think initially what InGen was wanting to do and what John Hammond was wanting to do was not a in itself evil thing. But as we've seen with the Jurassic World films, it can go very, very wrong. Or if even you want to drop another parallel, the the readaptation of the Planet of the Apes movies.
Oh yeah,
Those are good.
The
Those are
more
really good.
modern one. Yeah, the more
yeah.
modern ones where a scientist is trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's, if I remember correctly, and
Mhm.
instead
Yes.
he ends up creating super intelligent apes.
Hmm.
Way to go.
Yep.
So, anyway, any other thoughts on the Invisible Man or anything that we've discussed so far?
So there's some hidden sequels that most people don't know about that came out after this one. There's like the one, The Invisible Man Returns, where
Hmm.
Vincent Price played the part of the Invisible Man, and there's
Yes.
also the Invisible Woman that has Margaret Hamilton in that one. That's almost
That
ridiculous.
that so you know that was one of those where you know you make when you make a horror, the more horrors you make, the better chance that your horror starts to become a comedy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Like the first Freddy Krueger movie was like horrifying, right? But
Yes.
then the sequels after that, he's a comedian, you know.
Almost
Uh,
a very dark comedian. Yeah.
yeah, and so
Hmm.
like in that same fashion, by the time it gets to the Invisible Woman, like they play that movie off as a comedy. The the
Yeah.
Yes.
the comedic part being tee hee hee, the woman is naked.
Or even that you mentioned it, Son of the Invisible Man with Ed Begley
I don't think we've
Jr.
seen that one yet.
as
Ugh.
where he isn't even invisible, he just pretends to be.
Oh,
Oh
gee.
gee.
Oh, no.
It was on this it was on the special features for The Invisible Man and everything. They were talking about some of the sequels as you mentioned,
Okay.
Alicia,
Yes.
and everything. There's one called The Son of the Invisible Man where it's
Oh,
Ed Begley
no.
Jr. playing a guy who thinks that he's turned invisible, but he just runs around bare ass naked.
Oh gee.
And all the people just
So
kind of play into it.
Oh, man, he's a crazy man. Thinks he's invisible.
now
Wow.
That
now
he's taken
we
some
gotta watch
sort
that
of
tonight.
where he thinks he's taken some sort of a potion that's turned him invisible.
Oh, jeez.
No, you're not invisible. You're just loony. You're just loony toony.
You're invisible of your
So
sanity. That's what it is.
yeah, and he's not even necessarily evil. He's just nuts. He's just goofy. So well, guys and gals, Jack, Alicia, thank you so much. Good discussion, and I hope you all as well, and everything. Those of you that have joined us today enjoyed the discussion as well. As always, make sure you share your comments down below. What did you think the Invisible Man? Have you ever seen it? If so, has our discussion prompted you to maybe visit it for the first time or revisit it maybe in the first time in a long time? As always, make sure you smash that like button, share this out with all your friends who are fans of what we know as the ultra retro genre of film, the classics, the black and whites, the films from the 30s through the 70s, and so on. And of course, we will be back next month with another installment. Um, Make sure you follow all of us on our socials. I'll leave the link for Jaculation down in the description, along with the link for their channels and so on. And we'll see you all next time. You have a great day wherever you are all at. And as I like to say, be genuine, be yourself, and never take yourself too seriously. If you do all those things, you always have a place here at the Ambassadorial Wing.